Good morning again to everybody. My name is Chichi Onyenamelu. I am the Social Value Manager at the Hyde Group. I'm very pleased to be facilitating this morning's conversation. So I'll just be helping to kind of push things along. We've got a lovely lineup for you all today to kick off our Social Value Week, which I'll touch on a little bit more in a moment. But essentially, following on from my little introduction, we're going to go straight into hearing some information from Adam Compton over at Peabody, who are indeed sponsoring today's webinar. So we're going to have a little bit of a discussion around social value, what it is. Let's look at some information, stats and figures. Then we're going to move on to a conversation about social value journey, because of course, everyone is at a different stage in their social value journey. So Andrea Purslow down at Peabody, she's also going to pick up some conversation around that, joined by Corinne. Then we're going to go on to the importance of measuring and monitoring social value, which of course are two very key activities that one must do. And then we're going to hear a little bit more from two giants in the social value space. That's both HACT and Social Value Portal. Then there will be an opportunity for some Q&A. So please do use the chat function from now. You can make your comments and questions and we'll pick those up towards the end of the session. And then I'll touch on what else to expect for the remainder of this very exciting Social Value Week. So very briefly, before we move on to our first speaker, the Social Value Week was initiated by the Social Value Leadership Group. Who are the Social Value Leadership Group, you may ask? Well, I'm here to tell you that. The Social Value Leadership Group is a network of amazing people, social value leads from across the housing sector space. So we've got housing associations, local authorities, procurement specialists, and a whole host of other housing providers. We exist mainly to ensure that social value is firmly embedded in the procurement process, and that's within our own individual organisations, but just collectively, we're looking at driving up the standards of social value within the housing sector space generally. So that's who we are. Peabody, long-standing members of the SVLG, as I mentioned, are kindly sponsoring today's event. And so we're going to kick off now, I think, without further ado, and I'm going to hand over to Adam, I believe. So Adam, please do get your, have you got slides, Adam? Are you going to?
I do not. I'm not using slides. I'm going freestyle because otherwise I like to feel people may feel things like a death by PowerPoint if I kick off a whole section on the Social Value Act on slides. So I like to freestyle. Thank you for that, Chichi. Hello, everyone. My name's Adam Compton. I'm the Procurement Operations Manager at Peabody Trust. So part of my remit is to look at all our policies, our governance, and our processes at Peabody, and particularly around the procurement section. So I believe one of my colleagues wants to start off with a video. I've just seen something pop up on my screen. So if we start off our week with this video, and then we'll crack on. Looks like we're having a technical issue with the sound, so please bear with us. We're going to sneak peek into to the wonderful video that we are running, though. Oh, there we go. We've got the sound, so we're just going to go back to the start of the video.
Because it gets
I think social value is
working in partnership with our contractors and our supply chain to ensure that we are generating social impact in our communities that allows us as MTVH to improve people's lives every day.
Social value for me is about connecting our partners with our communities. It's about harnessing the skills and talents of the people that work for our suppliers and using those talents and skills to benefit people in our communities.
Social value is important because it gets us to think through our actions, consider whether they add value to society and how they can impact on future generations. It also helps us to be more socially conscious.
To really understand what it is that's needed in a specific community, and then to work with that community to design projects, interventions, opportunities that will benefit them as individuals and as a community.
As we look to the future, we will continue to champion social value and embed it in our procurement processes, driving a culture of value creation across everything we do. Together, we can achieve more and truly help people flourish.
Thank you very much for that video, Nikki. Sorry about the sound at the start, everyone. As Nikki just said, chat is very early, so we're all struggling slightly on that one. Monday morning and all that. So I'm here to introduce the Social Value Act, and as part of that, it's really tough for me to start any sort of session like this because I don't know exactly where you are on your social value journey. We've got people here that are procurers and might be looking to get more support on procuring, as well as we've got suppliers who might be on here looking, you know, for some more sort of information on what they need to do on part of the process. So what I like to do to kick off a session like this is really just go into the nuts and bolts around what the Social Value Act is, give you a bit of background information on that, so that we could look at, you know, further information in the presentations to follow mine. So the Public Services Social Value Act came into force on the 31st of January 2013. It was a back member bill. So if anyone knows, you know, too much about Parliament and how these things work, if a you know, a backbencher presents a bill, normally what you find is it's actually quite a weak act. The reason being is, you know, a single member of Parliament trying to get something through in the Commons, they really need to have something watered down quite heavily in order to get it through, you know, because basically anyone can veto these acts. So Chris White, the MP that wrote the Social Value Act, he brought us the Social Value Act that you see today. And there are a number of things on the Social Value Act that I feel we all feel could be a little bit stronger. And that does mean that there is a number of limitations that we've got within the Act, and, you know, we've got to work with. Now, the Act came in place, and the Act is basically essentially telling us as procurers that we need to look into, or we need to at least consider the option of social value whilst in a procurement. Now, what social value is, it can be a, you know, a myriad of things to a myriad of different people, but, you know, we're looking at what can we do and get added benefit from our contracts. Now, from a procurement point of view, what I would be looking for, you know, in a contract, we used to have the age-old adage of wanting to, you know, getting so many apprentices into you know, our contracts when we're procuring contracts, or, you know, hitting certain targets. And I think that, you know, social value has moved on a long way since then. As an example, you know, we've had suppliers that have taken, you know, 200 school children to the United Nations before to get them involved in projects the United Nations are running. Off the back of the stationery contract, we've managed to get, you know, hot desking spaces for small local medium enterprises in the social hub within a sort of confines of a building that we're letting to a concession contract through a cafe. You know, we've managed to get all sorts of long-term unemployed people employed, as well as, you know, the standard apprentices and all that good stuff. But you know, really for us, it's about what we can try and get from our contracts that is not costing the contractor money, because this shouldn't really be something that, you know, we're paying over the odds for, which is one of the, you know, the common criticisms everyone will get around the procurement space. They'll say, well, that's just going to cost us more money. We, as a procurement team here at Peabody, really like to see, you know, when we have our contracts come in and people submit social value, or sorry, submit against the social value part of our tenders, we're really looking to look at the proxy values and see how much, you know, social value that's worth. And Corinne, my colleague, will be talking about this later. But then what we're also looking for is, you know, what can someone add to this contract? And it doesn't need to cost the contractor a lot of money or any money at all. You know, if there's something that the contractor can do that will add to that service, it's really something that we would like for them to be able to do. So, you know, if you do, you know, find that you've got a contractor that is, you know, they've got a lot of workspace, you know, London at the moment, you know, there's so many empty office spaces as a result of COVID. Actually, what we're finding is that more suppliers are, you know, looking to enable hot desking. So small, medium enterprise companies that we might have at Peabody to say, hey, look, this is actually something that you could do. We've got a, you know, free office space, you know, available for a whole year. You know, if we win this contract, we'll certainly do that. And that's really helpful. So I think everyone here, when you're looking at the Social Value Act, the main thing that I want you to take away from today is that it's not going to, you know, if you're a supplier, it's not something here that's going to, you know, going to cost you money. It should be something you can add on to your contract at minimal cost because it's an added benefit. It's not, you know, the whole benefit of a contract. We get a number of suppliers thinking, you know, that they have to provide us money to our community foundation, or we've got to do X amount of things with apprentices. It's not about that. It's about what you can do for little or no money to just literally add benefit to society from a contract that we're running. From the procurement side of things, exactly the same thing. You know, we are considered an awful lot to be trying to fit a round peg into a square hole within the social value, you know, because there are confines of what you can and can't do. I think that the main thing that, you know, any procurers here should be looking at is literally sitting there and going, okay, how can we get added benefit from this contract? And let's see what we can do and work with our suppliers to do that. And sometimes that does mean going out to the market and saying, look, what can you do in advance? So we understand, you know, what certain suppliers are likely to be able to achieve. So yes. Now we've got, I believe, some polls coming up. I've just read a message in the corner of my screen. Oh, Chi-Chi's going to do that one after I've spoken. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Yeah, I'm very bad at multitasking. So when I get messages up talking about events whilst I'm speaking to myself, it's quite tough for me to handle. So yes, that was a brief background on a very brief background on the Social Value Act, around what, you know, procurement professionals would expect and also what suppliers would expect. And we've got a number of slides later on today talking about social value. We've seen the agenda coming up. So what I would really like to do from today is, first of all, everyone here to enjoy yourself, get to know more about the Social Value Act. If you want any specific questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A, and I'll be able to answer specific questions as well. So thank you.
Thanks for that, Adam. I was going to say before you go, in your opinion, does it go far enough, the Act, and what can we expect regarding the procurement bill?
No, sure. So sorry, I was I got sort of led astray there when messages came up, because that's exactly where I was going next. So thank you for that one. So no, the Social Value Act does not go far enough. I alluded to it at the start, saying it was a backmember bill. You know, essentially when a backbencher gets anything through, and I was involved, you know, more recently with Finn's law around, you know, the Animal Welfare Act. And the problem that you've got is you've got so many MPs that have a chance to veto anything, that you've got to have something that's so watered down to get it through. It's unreal. So the actual act that you get, you know, left with is never what you intended in the first place. No, it doesn't go far enough. But on the plus side, the public contract regulations that we're all currently using, Public Contract Regulations 2015, and they were amended in 2020 after we had Brexit. But you know, the crunch of that is the Public Contract Regulations 2015, which doesn't include anything on social value in a meaningful way. is getting changed. So, you know, this year we are looking at a new public contract regulations, the contract regulations 2023, which I believe sort of is fairly imminent, given that it's just gone through the third stage of the House of Commons and House of Lords committees. They are going to do a bit more with social value. They do want it to be more belt and braces. This is similar with an awful lot of things across the procurement sphere. They are going to want us to include far more. Now, the problem that it's got is, again, it's been watered down. So this goes for all sorts of things about the public contract regulations that's coming out. You know, there is a whole section and a whole ethos around transparency within public procurement. And actually what's come out from the new public contract regulations is they were looking to make things far more transparent. We would need, as procuring organisations, to submit a whole pipeline of work that we had coming up for people to bid. Now, House of Lords changed that. They said it needed to be £5 million because it's too bureaucratic. I'm in a bit of a halfway camp, because actually I did look at that and go, that's a lot of work. But at the same time, I did think it was a good idea. And the same thing with social value. It has been watered down a little bit, but the good news is there is more onus on us to do it. There is going to be you know, far more pressure on us to do it as you know, curers. And the most important thing that I think is coming out, which hasn't been offered before, is the Crown Commercial Services team. So basically the Cabinet Office, they're running a number of training sessions for both procurers and suppliers, and they're really looking at this as an opportunity to train people. So there's going to be regular training when this Act comes out, and there's going to be regular training to follow. Now, the difference between, you know, having training and not is when the Social Value Act came out, no one really knew what to do with it. You know, we were all walking on eggshells thinking, okay. And I think everyone picked up on apprentices. You know, everyone thought, oh, that's something we can do. We can get an apprentice. Let's count how many apprentices, or, you know, say, oh, if you spend £1 million, we need to have one apprentice. And it became so defined within such a small, you know, requirement that people lost, you know, what was next. So the great news is that this Act now, or the new legislation, is really defining that. It's really giving training for both suppliers and buyers, so we know exactly what to expect. Not only that, suppliers know what they're going to want to, you know, what we're trying to expect from them, because so many suppliers I speak to just don't know what we want. The rest of the tender documentation is fantastic, because it tells you a specification, terms and conditions. This is what we want. This is what we want. This is what we want. Social value, open-ended question. And I think that's the difference as well. It's really going to bring it to the floor, and certainly, you know, improve that, strengthen it as much as we wanted to, but it will strengthen it. So it's all good news from that front.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. I think the key message there is, whilst, you know, legislation, bills, you know, guidance are great and necessary, they are just that. They are guidance, and it's going to take organisations, both the procuring side as well as supply side, to really step up if they want to call themselves true social value champions and advocates. So thanks for those insights, Adam. Brilliant. Keep your questions coming, everyone, in the chat. We're already picking up a few, so that's really good to see. Before we move on to the connecting speaker, the next connecting speaker, a couple of polls, I think, are in order, just to make sure everybody's awake and alert. So be quick, please. First poll: what motivated you to join our session today? I'm sure I'm going to see quite a few for number 4, but I hope those weren't the only, that wasn't the only reason. So if you just make your selection, should come up on the screen. Few seconds.
Just remembered that we can't as panelists vote on this one, Cheaty.
No.
I was there clicking away, going, why is it not working?
Yes, not allowed, Adam. Okay, so let's have a look at the result. Right, an overwhelming 83% to learn more to develop our social value programme. Excellent. And actually, this kind of speaks to what we mentioned when we started the session. Everybody is likely to be at a different stage of their social value journey. We all had to start from somewhere. And even for those of us who've been doing it for a few years now, it's always worth reviewing and checking. Yeah, is what we're doing the best that we could be doing? Can we step it up? Let's share best practice. So great, good to see that there are people that want to learn more and want to figure out different ways to embed social value within their organisations. Okay, second poll. Let's go into a second poll. How would you describe your stage of your social value journey? So it'd be good to see if there's any correlation here between the novices, intermediates, advanced or experts, and the fact that people in the first poll wanted to see or get more information to embed. So quickly, fingers on buttons, go. Panelists, remember, you can't vote. Adam, stop trying to press the button.
I'll never stop.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay. So we've got some humble, quite a few humble organizations. So 27% of you have suggested that you're more at the beginning stages, novices. We've got 56%, so just over half would class themselves as intermediate. We've got 11% as at advanced and 6% at expert. Well, I think those of you who said you're experts and advanced, please do drop your details in the chat. Let's see how we can connect some novices and intermediates with these experts and advanced. You're welcome. This is a public service that we're doing here today. Thank you everyone for joining in on those polls. I think we've got a couple more peppered in throughout this morning's session. But I'd like to go on now to the next speaker, also from Peabody. We'd like to know a little bit more, Andrea, Corinne, around Peabody's social value journey, because I think, again, for people who are at different phases, certainly for those at the beginning, it's always quite useful to hear a little bit about others who have been on the journey for longer, reflections from learnings and musings over the past few years. So please, if you could just share your own thoughts and insights, that would be fabulous. So over to you, Andrea and Corinne.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chi-Chi. Well, good morning, everybody. It's lovely to have you with us today and for us to be able to be here. My name is Andrea Perslow. I'm Business Development Manager at Peabody, and I'm the operational lead for social value for the organisation. And joining me for this presentation is Corinne. Over to you.
Hello, yes, and I'm Corinne Manouge. I'm a program officer focusing on social value for Peabody and looking after a lot of the day-to-day kind of relationship management with our suppliers.
Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So just to introduce ourselves, Peabody, we're one of the oldest and largest not-for-profit housing associations in the UK, and our purpose is about helping people flourish. Following our merger with Catalyst back in April 22, Peabody Group is now responsible for 104,000 homes and has more than 220,000 customers across London and the home counties. We also have 20,000 care and support customers. Now, Peabody was created 160 years ago to alleviate poverty in London by providing quality, affordable housing. And today, we remain committed to providing great homes and services and making a positive difference to the communities that we serve. Next slide, please. Fundamental to our work is our broad social mission, as I mentioned, to help people flourish. And through the work of the Peabody Community Foundation, we build communities that are healthier, wealthier, and happier. And at this time of really great uncertainty, with our customers facing growing cost of living challenges, our work has never been more important. And we really take a partnership approach to work with our customers and stakeholders to understand their needs and ensure that people in our communities, whatever their circumstances, can live happier and healthier lives. Next slide, please. So what do we do? So having the right access to support and services is really key to helping residents make the most of their lives, and delivering social value helps us achieve this. This slide just shows some of the headline figures of our work over the last year. And our community strategy is really based on 4 key pillars. The first one is about tackling poverty and inequality. We work locally to understand community needs and deliver targeted support. And our approach includes our commitment to helping people increase their income by supporting them to progress in their work and access higher value jobs. We help people get into training, learn new skills, get better access to affordable childcare, and tackle debt with our comprehensive economic offer. As well as providing people with pathways into careers and helping broaden their horizons, we help them start or grow existing businesses and really help people gain the skills and confidence to achieve their personal goals. The second pillar of our strategy is about embedding wellbeing, and we all know wellbeing has never been more important. We know our residents' lives are busy with pressures coming from all sides, so we're doing our best to promote wellbeing across all areas of our business, making sure that residents have the right environment and support to adapt their lifestyle, learn new skills, and generally help them to lead happier, healthier lives. We also share power with our residents, and we aim to give our residents a voice. We believe in the power of partnership, and we try to channel our residents' strengths and passions to let them take the lead while providing resources and expertise. The final area of our strategy is about delivering community activities and programs. We all know that a successful community is a vibrant community that people want to be part of. And at Peabody, we try to use our size and influence combined with our local approach to create communities that our residents are proud to be part of. And through this, we deliver a broad range of communities and community activity. Slide, please. So why is social value important to us? It's really important that we scale up our impact by working with our supply chain and using our buying power to contribute to our mission to help people flourish. Now, many businesses recognise that they have a huge opportunity to give back and make a difference in their communities. Some choose to give financial support to local charities. Others encourage volunteers to workers to volunteer their time or sponsor community initiatives. And often when people think of a contract for services, they think purely about value for money or the quality of services. Now, social value is a different way of thinking about the value that we can get out of a contract. It's value that has wider community or public benefit. Now, here at Peabody, we invest a huge amount of money, approximately £1 billion each year, in goods and services. And by including an emphasis on social value in our contracts, we can maximise the value for money we create for our communities for every pound we spend on our business as usual activities. But this information is also really important to our investors. And increasingly, private investors use this information to make their investment decisions. And we're part of a group of organisations who are leading the way in developing environmental, social and governance, otherwise known as ESG, reporting standards for social housing. And our social value activity supports our measurement against these indicators. But in real terms, social value gives us a great opportunity to increase our social impact and make a real difference to people's lives. Social value is extra added value, but one that we really consider to be essential at Peabody. So a bit more about our social value journey. Next slide, please, Nikki. Against a backdrop of significant cuts to public funding, the Social Value Act that Adam spoke about earlier has been very widely adopted. Recognition of its importance to drive good growth, i.e. supporting public services providers to do more with their money and create inclusive value, is really seeing a shift in focus from purely driving down costs to the generation of real value. Now at Peabody, since 2015, we were making considerable headway to introduce practice and achieve added value from our supply chain. And as a result, we were yielding social value contributions from a section of our suppliers. However, our approach often resulted in us achieving the bare minimum against what was possible, and significant opportunities to increase impact were being missed. Now, as an organisation, Peabody is increasingly developing its thinking about our ability to impact at a community level. And in doing so, we've got opportunity to be more strategic about how we create social impact, and are looking to develop long-term strategies that ultimately support our residents and drive down costs in the longer term. Next slide, please. Now, back in November 2020, our executive committee approved a review of our social value activity since the Act came into force, and they agreed a programme of work which sought to shift our social value approach from compliance to the Act with best practice. And the exec committee approved a number of recommendations, which included trialling a standard social value weighting of 20% in contract tenders, and this was going to be measured alongside quality and cost. This was a really significant change to our previous approach, with tenders generally including a weighting of between 2 and 7%. The exec committee also proposed developing a new social value policy and procedure, which would be used by all commissioners, as well as introducing a clear governance and reporting structure for social value. Now, the programme proposed would not only help maximise social, economic and environmental value across all of our buying activity, but importantly, it would give us an opportunity to develop our organisational culture and create long-term behaviour change, with social value running through all that we do. So how did we develop our approach? Next slide, please, Nikki. Right from the very start, we focused on whole organisation development, not only making sure that we had the right tools in place to enable us to measure and manage social value activity, but also to develop our organisational culture as an ethical business. So we initially sought advice from a number of specialist agencies and explored the approach taken by peer organisations, such as many of those in the SVLG group. We worked with HACT on a discovery phase and held interviews across the business to really understand our organisational maturity in relation to social value. We became a member of the HACT Social Value Roadmap, which was a research piece which sought to broaden and deepen knowledge and use of social value tools across the housing sector. We also commissioned the Social Value Portal and used their TOM metrics as a baseline for a bespoke to Peabody range of social value metrics which supported delivery of our strategy. As discussion developed, it was really clear that there was a need for a two-fold approach, ensuring firstly that we've got the right tools in place, but also to explore and develop our strategic thinking. And we've continued to work across the broader Peabody group to refine our thinking by working with colleagues from procurement, strategy and planning, finance and treasury, and sustainability, with ongoing support from our board and executive team. The next slide, please. So, over the past 2 years, we've been making great strides. All of the recommendations that were made by our exec team have been actioned, which have included testing the 20% weighting across a range of contract types, measuring it alongside quality and cost. We've got a new social value policy and procedure. We have a formal social value steering group with senior representatives across the business who oversee our approach. We have tools and resources with a social value framework and a staff toolkit. We've also commissioned the Social Value Portal, and we've implemented the platform TOMS, which helps us manage the tender process and gives us a consistent way to measure outcomes across the business. And we're also testing the new HACT Social Value Insight tool. We've aligned our approach with our ESG reporting framework and value for money strategy, and it's firmly embedded in both our new group and our new community strategy. We have a new social value key performance indicator, and we report progress on a monthly basis as part of our group KPIs. We've got our very own social value champion, Bob Heapy, who's CEO of Town and Country Housing and Roseberry Group within the Peabody Group. And his role is really to champion social value activity, both internally and externally to the wider sector. We've also involved our customers in co-designing and shaping our approach, and we're engaging with our supply chain, the wider sector, and sharing good practice. I'm now getting a bit hoarse, so I will hand over to Corinne.
Thank you very much. There we are. So Andrea spoke there about the trial process that we went through to increase the weighting of social value in tenders and consider a new policy, new approaches. So now we just want to speak a little bit more about the findings from that trial period. So first, from working with our suppliers, we know that they want to make a real difference in our communities. The suppliers we engage with are adept at delivering social value and have the mechanisms to make it happen. Evidence from that trial period showed a clear increase in committed social value through our procurement process. At the conclusion of the pilot, against a combined new total contract value of £74.7 million, new social value commitments totaled £21.7 million. These commitments range across a variety of areas, but typically included pathways into careers and employment and supporting enterprise developments, supporting projects to boost mental and physical well-being, support for children and young people, active volunteering for our communities, direct funding for community programs that are being launched, driving local economies and supporting grant programs for resident-led initiatives, and providing environmental and sustainability initiatives. Next slide, please. So with particular focus on that weighting impact that we referenced, we found that although quality and cost remain as the key deciding factors when we have new tenders, the 20% social value weighting is helpful at contract award where margins in other evaluation areas are small. So in real terms, this means that contracts could be won or lost on the social value outcomes. So it does become increasingly important for our suppliers and bidders. Next slide, please. The trial did show us as well that clear mechanisms need to be further developed to capture and quantify contributions for smaller contracts. So there we're speaking about contracts that are below the thresholds for the UK procurement threshold, and also where relationships might be managed by our local teams on the ground. Next slide, please. With this, we do want to continue refining our local approach. The trial showed us that there is a clear need to tailor our local social value request in line with our local areas. So this may be, for example, Thamesmead in Southeast London, where we have quite a bit of activity, or Pembury in Hackney, where we also have quite a bit of activity. You really cannot underestimate the role that local teams on the ground can play in expanding social value relationships, particularly to have that local contact with the networks in that area, and they often enable delivery far beyond the contractual commitments. Next slide, please. So then as well with that, we did learn several of the challenges that we continue to face and how we can tackle them. First, we look at how we can ensure that social value commitments are delivered once they're made to us. We don't want to underestimate the power of communication with suppliers. Keeping communication lines open, regular, and consistent is crucial. The signing of a contract is just the starting point in that relationship, but then from there, we evolve and grow. You also need effective contract management, including the ongoing review of your social value delivery against contractual commitments, with overview by the contract core group. This may include quarterly meetings, regular catch-ups, etc. You'll want to measure impact and share your collective stories. Always great to capture the case studies and really share and celebrate the impact we've delivered together. To work closely with operational delivery teams, and again, to share and celebrate that success. Further from that, we also wanted to look at how we can embed social value beyond procurement. So social value is relevant to all parts of the business, and ultimately it's the golden thread that runs through everything that we do. We want to have an internal communications campaign to raise awareness for this, to make sure that it is coordinated and aligned across our broader business. As well, to capture the human impact of our work together, to share these case studies and tell people's stories. This really brings the work to life in a way that simple data and metrics cannot. Also, to keep the commissioning process for social value simple. The next presentation by HACT and the Social Value Portal will talk through models in more detail, so it's quite clear how this might be measured. Finally, then, to showcase the impact and value and to really celebrate our amazing supply chain partners. We could not deliver this without them, and I'm actually happy to see quite a few of them here today. So a huge shout out to Waits, Vinci, Axis, Advanced Building, Durkin, Malali, BNP Paribas, Purdy. I could go on and on. I think there's over 40 on a regular basis that I'll have some meetings with. So they're really too numerous to mention, and we are very grateful to them for their ongoing support. Thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. So next slide, please. So Corinne and I really hope today we've captured how here at Peabody we're evolving our approach to social value. In short, we're creating a step change in the value that we add and the impact we have in our communities through partnerships and working with our supply chain. This new approach ensures that all companies and organisations bidding for Peabody contracts have to give social value serious consideration when putting tenders together. But it also means that we'll be doing business with companies who share our values and want to help grow our positive impact, whilst maximising the value for money we create through our business activities. As we look ahead to the future, we're going to continue to champion social value and embed it in all our procurement processes, driving a culture of value creation across everything that we do. And together, we know that we can achieve more and help achieve our social mission of helping people flourish. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you both. Some excellent insights there. So for those of you who polled earlier that you are at that kind of novice or even intermediate stage, or even, you know, some of you advanced and experts, I think there were some excellent nuggets of information there from Andrea and Corinne in terms of, if you're really serious about social value, these are some of the things you need to ensure are happening within your organization, but also the relationships that you hold with your supply chain partners. You know, that's what they need to look like. I think it's very easy for us to get lost in this and that, and numbers and definitions and all of this, and forget that at the end of the day, this is about people and places. This is about communities. That's what drives, the need and necessity to do social value right, so to speak. And it was quite a balanced message, I would say, both for the procuring organisation, so whether it's the housing association, local authority, as well as for the supply chain partners. Because for procuring organisations, we have to make sure that our own houses are in order. We've got to make sure that the culture within our organisation is ripe and ready, for social value before we start the tendering process and setting expectations for our supply chain partners. If we're not doing it properly, if we don't have the policies, if we don't have that kind of executive leadership team input, if we don't have input actually from all levels of the organisation, then it's not really going to work, because we're not then speaking with a united voice when it comes to those tender processes, and our supply chain partners or potential supply chain partners can then become confused as to, well, what exactly are these, is this organisation's values when it comes to social value. So excellent points there, again, just to reiterate, both for procuring organisations and supply chain partners. So thank you. Right, so I think we'll do one more poll, if that's all right, before we start to look more into measurement and performance tracking. So third poll, what is the leading reason behind why social value has become a priority for your organisation? So there's always that moment of realisation or that wake up. So please select from the 5 options as quickly as you can, please. And let's see where people stand. Excellent, yeah. I'm just looking at some of the points in the chat as well. Interesting points. Okay, wrapping up your selections, please. Let's get those results. Okay, so interestingly, doing more for our communities, good. That's what I would expect to see at the top. Followed by developing business relationships that align with our values at 29%. Then we've got delivering better value for money, excellent. And Andrea mentioned the importance of linking your social value activity with ESG and value for money reporting, because they do go hand in hand. Responding to the climate emergency, and lending and financial requirements, because again, going back to that ESG piece, I think we're now seeing a rise almost of social investment, and things like delivering social value are becoming a core necessity now for these social investors. All right, thank you for participating in that poll. I think I did spot a question earlier that asked about the slides, and the answer is yes, these slides will be available. We're going to pop a link to the SVLG microsite in the chat so that people can visit there at any point throughout the week and beyond. That's where we'll load up slides and kind of other points of information, questions that maybe we don't get through today, and so on and so forth. So we'll get that posted up in the chat. So I'm going to hand over now. We're just a few minutes behind schedule, but we'll still be okay, to one of our colleagues now, Michael McLaughlin over at HACT, followed by Nathan Good from the Social Value Portal. But we're going to start first with Michael, and we're now looking at the importance of monitoring and measuring social value. So you've done all that good stuff beforehand. You've made sure that it's properly embedded in your procurement process, your new contracts, your new contractor rather, or your supplier are now on board, and now you've got to start thinking about performance management. So Michael, over to you. Please do kick us off.
Thank you very much, Chichi, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us in such great numbers. I probably echo some of the points made, particularly by Chichi and Andrea earlier on. But so to start, my name is Michael McLaughlin. I'm the head of social value at HACT. Now, do you want to move on to the next slide? The HACT social value approach, I thought it's probably interesting to have a think about, again, speaking about where we are in journeys. There may be people who are thinking about social value and aren't even quite sure what we mean by social value. And to give the kind of the definition that HACT use, we often think about specifically on the impact that housing associations or social housing organisations have on people and communities first and foremost, and the ability that creating that impact has to transform lives. So the definition there is the wider non-financial impacts of programmes, organisations and projects, especially on the well-being of individuals and communities and of the environment. So really what that means, and probably what sets HACT's social value approach from others. Sorry, I'm hearing people are struggling to hear, so bear with me, I'll see if I can change any of those settings. Is that any better? Someone put in the chat if you can hear me slightly better there.
Yes, a bit better there, Michael.
Okay. So I'm not sure how much you heard of that there. Hopefully caught the gist of it. But I suppose the gist of that was that the way HACT in particular view social value is about that non-financial impact that the work of social housing organisations have on the well-being of individuals. And we really do focus on that well-being aspect because we know that's what transforms lives. And as we move through the slides, we'll kind of unpick some of those kind of key issues that show that importance of well-being. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please? So again, touching on some of the points Adam made earlier on, and I won't kind of labour on this, is social value, you know, in terms from a legislative point of view, really comes from a kind of procurement base. But again, some of the guys had mentioned there, really social value isn't created by one standalone activity. It's really carried out by organisations that work closely with communities and residents. And it's about that kind of overall impact that we can have on communities and residents. And yes, it's great that we have legislation on it. Again, going back to Adam's point earlier on, does it go far enough? My sense would be no, that you know, some of that kind of good practice would be you would want social value included in any contract, regardless of the value. But actually, we would like to view it across the kind of more wider aspect of kind of public policy rather than procurement. And interesting that the kind of move, particularly in Scotland, as my accent shows, is where I'm based. The legislative focus is on sustainable procurement and that kind of green agenda, whereas a lot of the Welsh stuff comes from the Welsh generation goals and kind of embedded again in procurement. So it's something we'll see developing as time goes on. But next slide, please. So again, going back to the initial point I made about well-being and importance of measuring well-being. So I think you often hear people say that the success of a country is how they treat the kind of most vulnerable people in society, and really to kind of allude to that, actually how we measure improvements in well-being of a person can help us really understand the impact we are making. So the kind of grounds of the kind of UN Sustainable Development Goals, which I've got up in this slide, is based on a well-being approach. So actually, the improvement you make in a person's well-being can be tracked and measured, and certainly through the HACT methodology is what we've done. And again, we have outcomes that kind of match up to the kind of key areas in terms of how we measure that. So HACT measure well-being through financial proxy, which has been mentioned earlier. Now, an example of which is looking at someone getting a job, the social value attributed to that. So say, we'll just pick a kind of a random figure. So say if the value was £10,000 for someone receiving a full-time employment. Now that doesn't mean that person gets £10,000, or it doesn't even mean the economy gets £10,000. What it means is that person feels better to the value of £10,000, as in it would take you handing them £10,000 in their hand to feel as good as they feel by that job. And the reason we do that, use a proxy, is because people understand the difference you feel from someone handing you £5 to someone handing you £500. So we've created this methodology alongside Symmetrica, and it's based on the kind of 4 main UK wellbeing surveys, 2 which are in the recent census, and then they're cross-referenced with kind of, over 20,000 kind of research to understand the difference that someone feels through the different outcomes we've measured. So we have 75 different outcomes that we measure, and they're all aligned to social housing organisations and the indicators they have. So from things like, we'll measure employment, we'll measure local environment outcomes, health outcomes, financial inclusion outcomes, and kind of youth social group and physical activities. But we also do stuff around the built environment, focusing on the maintenance of buildings, focusing on the maintenance of the kind of local area, but also, and increasingly important, the energy efficiency of buildings as well. So I think it's something that that we continue to develop. Move on to the next slide, please. Again, we've spoken about the importance of measuring impact, and the kind of evidence that we have, and we've done several papers on this. The one I'm showing there is on the impact of social housing, and really what that showed was that the impact measuring demonstrates the value of social housing. Now, as we are increasingly kind of pushed for costs, it's massively important that we have better ways to measure and understand the value, or the additional value, of affordable housing, and the kind of additional support that we provide to tenants, particularly in the kind of current climate, as we really do increasingly have to transform kind of lives and communities, or certainly support that those kind of transformational activities. And again, it's worth seeking out that paper, which I'll put a link for in the chat, because I think it does underpin a lot of the kind of main focus of today. Move next slide, please. As Andrea mentioned earlier, HACT worked with the sector, so we are a kind of very bespoke social value services, but our origins is and always will be social housing, and we've worked very closely with the social housing sector to develop this new kind of roadmap approach to look at some of those outcomes that we mentioned earlier, to see how relevant they are for your organisations, and we've now developed that in line with the steering groups, and delighted that some of the guys on the calls today were part of that, driving that forward. So I think that's something that we've now updated the measurements, and as I say, we are kind of moving on to the area of that kind of excellence and certification assurance, and I think it's something that we'll continue to drive forward with the sector, and work really closely just to help you guys understand and measure the impact of the work, not just in social housing, but throughout communities with your partner organisations. Can I move to the next slide, please? Just move on to the next slide again, that's fine. So the kind of last point I was going to make was a lot of the conversation's been about procurement, and something that HACT have developed off the back of understanding the needs, and the social value roadmap that we've worked across the UK with, is that we can now map our social value indicators against existing frameworks. So I showed the UN Sustainable Development Goals earlier on, they're one such framework. I suppose the one that captured most interest is the SRS reporting framework. Often, as people are looking for ESG reporting, they need to have better understanding of what that S is in ESG, in terms of the kind of social aspect, and we can map the outcomes of our social value bank against the SRS framework through our tool, Social Value Insight, which we can provide a kind of free demo for if that's something you're interested in. But I think it's something, particularly as you look to better measure and understand your procurement activities in light of the kind of SRS stuff, it's huge. Move next slide, please. The last point I wanted to touch on is that we often, and it was interesting in some of the poll there about, I thought the environment stuff would probably come up higher in this, because in terms of that ESG piece, that there's no greater almost social value created than environmental social value. The best kind of non-financial outcome is sustaining the planet we live in for longer in a more sustainable way. And actually, we are looking to support understanding of the what we do in the built environment through retrofitting properties and attributing social value and actually creating these carbon credits. So ultimately, when retrofit properties, you're increasing tenant outcomes, you're increasing impact on that tenant, on that community, through the work they do in that building. Now, what we've created, and it's a verified carbon standard, and we can now create carbon credits based on that retrofit activity, which can be sold back to kind of buyers who are looking to kind of procure better kind of ESG credentials often. So it's something that we are driving forward, and effectively you're spending money on retrofitting, and you can make money through selling some of those carbon credits that you're creating. And it's, as I say, it's the only scheme like this in the world, actually, in terms of the built environment. No one else creates carbon credits based on that. So really exciting work, and again, coming off the back of the work of the roadmap, it's something that we'll continue to drive forward, and we're running a pilot on just now. So again, if you want to find more out about that, please do drop me a note. Next slide, please. So that was a bit of a whistle-stop tour of where we're at, and the importance that we are currently placing on measuring impact and kind of demonstrating the kind of social value and kind of transformational aspects that you guys as social housing organisations really do work on a day-to-day basis. So delighted to be here talking about, to hear the rest of the speakers today, and happy to chat with anyone both in the chat and via email. So yes, thank you.
Thank you for that, Michael. So some insight there on the HACT methodology, wellbeing methodology. I think the thing that you mentioned there, Michael, that a lot of people will resonate with a lot of people, was just that point about presenting in financial proxies. I mean, that's just the reality, I think, of a lot of reporting and the way things are done. It's a language that boards and senior leads and supply chains, etc., understand. But it's interesting to kind of see what sits behind that methodology. We're going to hand over to Nathan now, Nathan Good at Social Value Portal, to just continue the conversation around measuring and reporting. Any questions that people have for either Michael or Nathan, please start popping them in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll pick them up after Nathan's section. Over to you, Nathan.
Okay, thanks very much. Chichi, I'm okay for 10 minutes, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, cool. Okay, great. Thanks very much. Good morning, everybody. Some really interesting stuff already this morning. Hopefully I can kind of add to that in this short session. Today I'm going to do a little bit of a recap or stroke introduction to the TOMs, but I think given the survey showing that about 3/4 of the audience are intermediate and above, I think it's more of a recap than an introduction, so that's great. I'll talk a bit about the importance of reporting and the benchmarking work that we're starting to do coming out of the data that we have around social value, and then I'll finish up with some of what's next for the TOMs. So Nikki, could you move on to the next slide, please? Thanks very much. Completely agree with Michael's definition of social value. We've all got our own takes on how to define social value. Looking at it from a social value portal perspective, it's both broad and specific, if that makes sense. So in other words, it covers the economy, community, and, as Michael's pointed out, very importantly, the environment, but also it's very specific in the sense that it's about looking at value added. It's about looking at what business does going beyond business as usual, and this is particularly important to understand in the context of procurement. So going back to some of the things that Adam was saying earlier on, let's move on to the next slide, please. So the TOMs, or the social value TOMs system, as it's starting to be called, is a system of compatible measures that can be used and is typically used as standardized frameworks. So the most commonly used is known as the national TOMs at the moment, and there is a core set of 40 measures that sit within 5 themes and 20 outcomes. These 40 measures cover most, but not all, of what people generally want to report on as a baseline, as a starting point for social value reporting. We've heard from a number of people already about the fact that this is very much a social value journey that we're on, and I would completely echo that. So there's it's kind of an approach that says you start with something, you start with a basic set of measures, and then you can build from there, and you learn how to use those and what else to integrate in order to make it a very much a social value journey. And the TOMS works for procurement. It also works for measuring your own operational social value. We have also mapped the TOMS to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So like Michael, we see that those UN SDGs as almost like the social value framework for the planet, and aligning what we're doing with those 17 goals is really important. Okay, Nikki, let's move on. We have a number of fundamental principles that we follow when we're developing and applying the TOMS framework. I've talked a little bit about themes, outcomes, and measures. That's the structure, the architecture, really. So starting from a broad conceptual idea of the kind of areas that you want to influence, which are sit very clearly within those social, community, and environmental drivers. Outcomes are descriptions of the things that you as an organization want to change and that you have the capacity to change and influence, because you can't boil the ocean, you can't do everything at once. And the measures are the clearly defined, very specific things that are things that you can then use to quantify the social value that's being delivered. And it's really important that the connection between the themes and the outcomes and measures is strong, but also that the definition around the measures themselves is very clear, so that we know we're quantifying the right thing. Really important for us is full transparency in terms of that methodology. So we share all of the detail of how we've got to the proxy values, what drives the approach, etc., etc., and that creates quite a lot of stuff to work through. And one of the things that we're working on at the moment, which I'll come back to later, is simplifying all of that and making it easier to understand and navigate, and to kind of identify the things that you need to know, that you want to know, depending on the social value, the stage that you're at in terms of your social value journey. Okay, Nikki, let's move on. Thank you. So moving on to reporting social value. We have always, as an organisation, been a combination of an approach, a methodology, the TOMS framework, a way of capturing and talking about and quantifying social value, but at the same time actually providing a mechanism for people that work with us to record that social value and build it up over time. So we've been doing that, capturing and reporting and recording of social value, those activities against the TOMS measures for 6, 7, 8 years now, and we are beginning to build up some interesting data. And it does take time. It's all about this social value journey. Obviously, to be able to use that data, we have to make sure that it's robust. So we've implemented a structured data validation system that works on a scoring methodology, but essentially gives an assurance that the data can be relied on. And the reason we can do that is because the TOMS methodology, the TOMS system, comes with a clearly defined set of evidence requirements for each individual measure. So we know whether or not the information that's being reported to us is actually consistent, compliant with those measurement requirements. All of this gives us a strong set of data that we can then use, and we now have many thousands of social value records that we are beginning to analyse and understand and look at some of those trends and look at the kind of social value that's being promised as targets in procurement and then ultimately delivered in practice, and how that's all beginning to shape up. And for our members, we provide a service to kind of support them to check that data and make sure that it does stand up to scrutiny. But whether or not it's us doing the review or the checking, or some other organisation, there's a fundamental principle that we would say is really important, that will become more important. And we heard a little bit about ESG earlier on, and I think that's one of the directions from which the need for more checking of data in social value will kind of strengthen, become more significant. And that is all of that is simply going to grow, and the reason you need to do that is that you can then stand by that information publicly to your stakeholders, your auditors, your board, whoever it might be. Okay, let's move on. So really what we would say is data is everything. It's all about the information that you know, that you have about what is being delivered in terms of social value terms. Whether the initial quantification is right or not, well, the framework in itself is in essence a hypothesis. It's a best guess, but based on generalized but extensively researched data sets to start you, give you something that you can work with and you can stand behind. But actually you then need to know what happens in practice, and Corinne talked a little bit about telling the story of social value. So actually having the data and being able to rely on the data allows you also to tell the story of social value, but you then need to support that with case studies and qualitative descriptions of what's going on as well. So all of this is beginning to build up, and it's all getting really interesting. A couple of interesting stats from the benchmarking analysis that we're doing at the moment, that we'll be publishing more about in the coming months, is that we've heard kind of comments that social value targets are not actually being delivered. The targets that are being promised in procurement, they're not being followed through. Well, our data shows that over the piece they are. Our data shows that 107% of the targets, so slightly more than was promised, is being delivered. Actually, when you dive into the detail, it varies quite a lot. So there's some work to do to understand where it's working, where it's not working, and really interesting to hear Adam and Andrea talk about that. And then also the points about charities and not-for-profits, that you know, there's a sense that they struggle with the TOMS system. We're not seeing that either. We're seeing them score highly. So I can see Chichi appearing, which tells me that my 10 minutes is up. So can we just quickly move on to the next slide very quickly, and I'll just kind of wrap up. So as I say, we're doing a lot of work to try and simplify the TOMS, make them easier to use. We're also developing out the many of the TOMS measures and increasing the social components of those, as well as updating data sets. In the coming 12 months, we will be starting to build well-being into the TOMS framework in a more extensive, consistent way, looking at how that then flows through to social impact. And we're going global, so we will be developing a global social value framework, which we think is important in the context of this wider ESG debate that we're starting to have. So, Chichi, thank you very much. I'll stop there.
Lovely, thank you so much, Nathan. I think the message to take from that, certainly that evidence, that focus on the evidence. You know, we can all get lost, as I said before, in the numbers and financial proxies, but if we don't have the evidence and the qualitative data to back it up, then, you know, the numbers will only take us so far. So thank you for giving us that insight there, Nathan, and interesting to see how the TOMS are going to further develop. Great, from both yourself and Michael. Okay, so we have a few moments left of the session. We'd like to spend that on some Q&A. So I'm not going to faff about too much. Panel members, can all of you put your cameras on, please? I'm also going to welcome Rajvinder Uppal from Southern Housing. Raj, thank you for joining us as well. Let's get another housing association's perspective, especially one from yourself. You've been doing the social value bit for quite a long time, so good to have your voice added to these conversations. I'm going to start with the questions. I know some people wrote questions in the Q&A board, but also the chat board. If we start with the Q&A board, question from Jeanette Brooks. This was about how do we support, or how can you support social value with smaller businesses with lower contract values? And then a sub question about whether there is the same tender weighting. So I think I'm going to hand that one. If we start with Andrea, can you kick us off with that, particularly because of the weighting element to that question? So how can smaller businesses with lower contract values be supported to deliver social value?
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we found in the trial at Peabody was that we really need to develop a clear mechanism to capture and quantify contributions for smaller contracts, and where relationships are managed by the local teams on the ground. The trial that we did really focused on contracts above the UK procurement threshold. So what we're looking at now is how we can make a very localised ask on lower contract values and support those smaller businesses. And we're testing this out with the HACT Social Value Insight tool at the moment. And it might be, Michael, do you want to add anything about that, about you know, opportunity to support, you know, lower contract values with a very bespoke ask rather than a kind of more generic specific ask?
I think that's absolutely right. I think probably the point, my overriding thought on that is about kind of understanding the local area. So having that more bespoke. So that's about, you know, yes, there might be greater social value proxies in environmental outcomes or in employability outcomes, but actually is that what the area needs? Is that what the tenant needs? So I think understanding those local communities and being able to provide a kind of bespoke tool or set of values that align to that. And I think that the social value insight tool exactly does that. The other point, and I'm sure everyone here would adhere to this, is it has to be simple. It has to be something that you can do almost like not as an additional task, but actually you're collecting this data. How can you best use it to understand not just social value for this project, but better understand your tenants, your properties, your community, and be able to use that in a wider sense? And I think, you know, having a range of outcomes that are kind of fit for you guys is really the way to do it. And I think, you know, delighted that you pulled social value insight into it, because I think it's probably a really light touch way to do that in a robust setting. So absolutely.
And would you both say that having the same weighting, so this excellent 20%, I always get very excited when I see organisations embedding at least 20% weighting for this social value portion of the scoring. Would you adhere that, or expect, sorry, smaller organisations to adhere to that same 20%?
So would I expect it to? Not necessarily. Would we like to see that? Absolutely. But I think you know, it can't be again something that's so onerous that it makes it have less impact. And I think it's all about the impact of, you know, the social value. We're not just looking to create numbers, we're looking to transform communities. And if we can do that in a supportive way, it has to be something that works for organisations, unless there's a legislative overarching reason to do that in the meantime.
Yeah, okay, so bringing in a more localised, bespoke version of the standards. Raj, do you want to add anything from Southern point of view, or just an alternative perspective?
I mean, I agree with a lot of what Andrea and Michael have said. I think when you're working with smaller organisation, it's identifying their strengths, their expertise, and matching those to your local need in the communities they are working in. So at Southern, we try to match, and to be fair, we do take the same approach with the larger organisations, but you scale it up with how large an organisation is. So with our smaller ones, we identify what they can deliver in the communities they're based in and work with them to identify the right projects and the impact they can have in those communities. I sometimes it's not about the value of the contract, it's the, like Michael said, it's the value of the work they carry out in the communities they're based in. And a small project can have a massive impact. So it's just about identifying right projects for the right contractors, regardless of the size, to make sure the work we're doing has the maximum impact.
Yeah, I think just to reinforce that, there is this sometimes misconception that smaller organizations or social enterprises or MSMEs can't deliver social value. I think we can all very unequivocally state that we've probably seen some of the best social value coming out of small, locally based organizations. So if you're out there, those on the call who are worried that being smaller will somehow put you at disadvantage or you'll struggle, reach out. As I say, this is one of the purposes of having events like this. Reach out to those of us on the panel today, and we can share sort of tips and tricks on how to put your best foot forward, so to speak. Next question on here. Right, this is an anonymous. Sometimes the broader economic and social objectives are overlooked in the contract and in favour of local contract focused social value. That's not to say these initiatives, sorry, it's a bit of a wordy one. That's not to say these initiatives do not produce meaningful outcomes. Here comes the question. How do organisations like yourselves strike a balance between defined outcomes and the autonomy to develop initiatives in contracts? So I think this is looking at where we have those, I think most of us have kind of a standardized list or matrix or menu of social value options versus the kind of, I suppose, older way of having that open-ended, if you were to get this contract, what would you do? So it's how do you find that balance between set expectations or set list and kind of allowing people to come up with their own innovative ways of doing social value. So I'm going to go to Adam first, I think. So Adam, preset list, open-ended.
I did answer the last question. That was easy.
Oh, Adam, you've got an echo for me. Are you echoing with anyone else? Is anyone else hearing?
Sound down a bit. I turned it up earlier. Is that any better?
Say that again.
Is that any better?
No, still echoing.
Oh, that's strange. Sorry, I will try and put myself on mute and come off mute to see if that changes things.
Sure.
Give that a go.
No.
No. How upsetting. Right, I'll tell you what, I'll pick my laptop up. Does that help? Don't know why I would have done, just had a feeling.
Not to worry. Will you sort that out, Adam? I'll come over
I'll find some headphones to use.
Yes. If we hand over, Nathan, would you like to come in on that? So kind of having a preset list versus a kind of open social value question.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting one. What we are starting to see some, well, particularly local authorities are certainly kind of being a bit more prescriptive about what they're looking for, and that can, of course, bid us down a particular route which they might not necessarily otherwise have been comfortable going down, and I'm not sure that's the right answer. And on the other hand, if you make the list too open and too long, it causes issues as well, and people need some clarity. As Adam was saying earlier on, you know, the bidders are really looking for much more clarity about where to focus. So there's a kind of middle ground, I think, that can only come from experience and understanding and insight into what kind of social value is relative to what kind and size of contract that's being procured, and it is very much something where you need to get a balance right between, you can't sort of bespoke the ask for every single contract, but so you've somehow got to kind of get to a range of options that is broad enough and allows for some level of innovation, although you don't need to recognize that what some people think of as innovation and new and interesting might not be considered to be that by the buying authority. So, you know, it's about getting the balance right, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. Thanks, Nathan. Adam, anything to add? I see you've got your little headphones on now.
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's much better.
Fantastic. These headphones weren't working last week, so it's good to know that the headphones are now working, the laptop's not. I think it's a really interesting question, actually, because essentially what we have gone from is having just an open-ended question, 10 years ago, where we didn't really know what responses we wanted. The market didn't really know what we wanted, and we just kind of go, oh. And as we've sort of progressed, we've realized actually having these prescriptive methods is really helpful to us, because we can go, okay, we're now comparing apples and apples, we're not comparing apples and oranges. However, quite rightly, what the question has just asked is, now we've sort of gone so far in one direction, we're now losing the ability for suppliers to actually present their own ideas, because we have gone down that route of going, okay, well, we didn't know what we wanted, so now we're saying what we want, but now actually we've gone too far the other way. So I think just like in politics, when people go too far left and too far right and then they come back into the middle, that's probably where we want to be. And I think realistically, the only way to do that is to have those prescriptive methods to say, okay, to those suppliers that don't know what they're doing, they might be a really small business that do not have a bids team, they're struggling to understand how to run through what is already an onerous procurement process. So have something for them there, but actually have something where you can say, actually, have you got any other ideas? Now, the problem that we have is, in procurement is then trying to compare those apples and apples again, because then we've got, something on a list, it's nice and easy, 5 bids have come in and it's all looking hunky-dory, and then 1 bid's come in and it's completely different. We don't have any mechanism to score that. So we need to be, really careful, as we've already discussed, and I think Nathan went into some depth about, making sure that we're able to score things rigorously, and we are, able to score in such a way that is clear and transparent to the bidders. So if you are doing this hybrid approach, if you like, here's a list, but anything you want to add to it, you've just got to really think about how that's going to be scored. And I think from my point of view, and we've discussed local initiatives and local opportunities, is how do you say to someone what is worth more than something else? So with HACT and the social value toolkit that we've been talking about with the predefined list, what those values are, because they've actually people have looked into it, and the bidders who know what that's worth. But going back to my earlier point, what I'm looking for when I'm procuring is something that as a contractor can do for relatively nothing that's going to make a big difference. So it is a case of saying, well, actually, what are our values? What are our priorities? So if we're looking in Thamesmead, where we mentioned, and Corinne and Andrea mentioned in some depth earlier, we've got a number of issues in Thamesmead that aren't going to be the same if you look at central London. So we need to come up with an idea of saying, okay, for any bidders that are wanting to bid, these are our priorities, and this is how we're going to be able to score those separate bids, to sort of say, okay, well, these are meeting our priorities or the needs of the public that we're working in, whether you're a local authority or housing association. So you're looking then at not a prescriptive list, but you are looking at some values. You can say, actually, are you going to be helping in a number of these areas? And that way, at least bidders have got something to go on, rather than sort of, saying to you, oh, I'm going to be able to, get X, Y, and Z delivered to, small, medium enterprises in this particular borough. Actually, that borough, we might not be doing much work ourselves with that, so we don't know what the problem is. We might be focusing on another borough to do that first. So actually telling bidders that's exactly what we're working on, and what we've got, what we're aware of, what our priorities is really important for us to be able to get companies to come in and give us those ideas, because we don't have all the ideas. We know a good idea when we see it, but until we see it, we don't necessarily know if it needs to be on our list or not. Absolutely. So yeah, trying to keep it agile is important.
Excellent. Thank you, panelists. Hope that answered the question for that anonymous question asker. So I'm going to hand this one over to Corinne. So the question was, how did you get buy-in from your senior leadership team for the 20% weighting? And do you have any intention of increasing this?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. It definitely was a long process. Basically, as I understand it, we took a paper to the executive team asking for approval for a number of recommendations, as Andrea was detailing a bit earlier, and that was to trial the new approach that had the inclusion of this 20% weighting for social value. That's across a range of contract types above the UK procurement threshold, and to demonstrate the impact that the new approach would have on our community programs. At the time, we also asked for approval to develop a new social value policy and procedure, and also a suite of tools and resources we'd start to deploy. Really importantly, we asked for an executive social value champion, as well as a clear governance structure, which would include a cross-organizational steering group comprising representatives from across business. The recommendations were successfully agreed with little hesitation, which was really heartening and really important for our ongoing development. I think it did help that we were having a pilot phase to demonstrate the impact, and we also introduced a waiver scheme whereby deviations from that 28% weighting could be agreed and evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So that really becomes a broader conversation with the relevant business units across business development, procurement, et cetera. We can look at that kind of individually. To answer the last part, at this stage, we don't envisage increasing the weighting, although we won't rule this out in the future. But yeah, for the time being, the chart is 20% as the ideal.
Nice. Thank you. Adam, do you want to add anything on to the end of that?
Yeah, I think one really important thing for us at Peabody is seeing this as a good thing. I think a lot of businesses out there think social value is another piece of red tape that the procurement team will bring in. People don't necessarily see the benefit of it, until they've seen it. So what we were really clear on in the procurement team is we didn't want this to be a procurement policy. We really wanted Andrea in particular and her team to really lead on this, because the work that our community foundation does is fantastic, and actually having it coming from their angle, even though it was around procurement, was really important to us, because people said, okay, this will help the community foundation do more work, rather than see procurement go in and say, we want to do this because it's going to be great, and people just go, oh no. So that was a really important steer for us, and that's why Andrea and her team were the ones that presented that to the exec, and because quite simply we knew that if we brought it in as a procurement team, there would be more pushback against it, which I think is panned out, because everyone saw the community foundation doing great work and think, brilliant, we'll support that, rather than deal with a piece of red tape. So anyone else out there, work with your community foundation, work with your local economic inclusion teams, and really try and get, if possible, get them to lead on it, because you can get through an awful lot more when people are using it, and see it as a good thing rather than a piece of red tape.
Excellent. Thank you, Adam. I can see we've hit time, so unfortunately we've run out of time, and there are so many more questions to answer. So this isn't going to be one of those situations where at the end of a webinar people say, oh, we're going to collate all the questions and get responses, and then it never happens. We actually will gather the questions that we've had on the chat and in the Q&A on the Q&A board. We will ask the panel to generate responses to those questions, and then, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to post them on the SVLG microsite before the end of the week, so that people can just go on there, not only see what's coming up for the rest of the week, but actually read the answers to your question and see who they can contact. So we'll have the contact information as well for all of the panelists here today, so you can reach out and share. One thing I will say is that I did see a lot of questions coming in around guidance and help and support. The SVLG, as a kind of collective network, we are looking at pulling together something that can support organisations who are about to bid for work, think through some of these social value elements and questions and considerations, large or small organisations. So please do look out for that. We'll have something coming along at some point. So I want to say a massive thank you to all of our panel members, Nathan, Michael, Raj, Adam, Andrea, Corinne, and Nikki, who's behind the scenes. We mustn't forget our excellent comms and tech support today. So thank you very much to all of you who joined today. Thank you for making the time. Let it not stop here. Please do go on to socials, whether it's LinkedIn, Insta, Twitter, tweet about the information you've heard today. Let's really encourage conversation to get started now around all things social value, how to embed it, how to measure it, how to do it better. Please connect, like, share, repost, etc., etc. So coming up for the rest of the week, Tuesday and Wednesday, we've got some videos that will be shared on the social media platforms around impact that social value can make in communities. On Thursday, we've got the launch of the Big Six. I'm not even going to say too much about that. You just need to log on to the socials and the microsite, to see more. And then we're capping off the week with our first SVLG Social Value Awards ceremony, where we're going to recognise some of our supply chain partners who have been doing social value right. So all that's left to say is have an excellent rest of the day, and hope to engage with many more of you on social media and at the forthcoming events. Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.